This is Al McFarlane, host of the Conversation with Al McFarlane. You're listening to 98.3 FM, KFAI, Minneapolis. I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to The Conversation with Al McFarlane. Today, all week long, we're broadcasting live from South Minneapolis from George Floyd Square. That's right. We're on location at George Floyd Square in South Minneapolis. This is George Floyd Week. Thanks to my colleagues and our friends and co-producers at KFAI. They have allowed me to preempt their program this hour all week long. And we're bringing you live conversations from a wonderful location, Listen to Us studio at 3730 Chicago Avenue, right on the corner of George Floyd Square in South Minneapolis. If you're in the neighborhood, drop in, say hello. We want to shout you out. If you're listening on any of the channels, the platforms that we're on, we are streaming to YouTube, to Facebook, to LinkedIn, and to Twitter. We appreciate your support, your involvement, your engagement. We want to grow that. We ask and invite everyone to go to YouTube Insight News MN to subscribe, to be a subscriber to the program. That's how we sort of know how many people we're reaching, how much engagement there is. Your engagement, your connection is critical, important, and we're grateful to you. We thank you for that. Today's going to be a wonderful program, a great program as always. We've got a number of people both in studio here in South Minneapolis and joining us remotely as well to talk about the issues that are important to all of us. I want to acknowledge that today's program will include my first interview with U.S. Senator from Minnesota, Tina Smith. She's a regular visitor. She uses this platform regularly to report out priorities, considerations, legislation, and she'll do that today. Also, another regular leader and friend of our community, voice of our community, Commissioner Rena Moran on the Ramsey County Board of Commissioners. She's here with me in studio. After that, we'll talk to some people in community who've been impacted, who've been affected by the crimes, by the trauma, but also who are bringing solutions and healing to our community, but by their belief that speaking up, standing up, showing up makes all the difference in the world. So no matter where you are, we invite you to do the same. Show up, speak up. You can join this conversation simply by sending a note, put a question mark or question or a comment in the comment section. We'll shout you out. We thank you. Well, let me begin by bringing in Senator Tina Smith. Senator, good afternoon. Welcome to the Conversation with Al McFarlane, live from George Floyd Square. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Al. It's so good to hear your voice and to see you on my screen and to be with you again. And I'm also really excited to know that you'll be speaking next with my dear friend Rena Moran, who's been such a friend and mentor to me back when I was Chief of Staff for the Governor Dayton and also Lieutenant Governor, and now that I'm a senator. So I feel like this is an auspicious group of people to be with today.
It really is, and the occasion is an appropriate occasion. We're here at George Floyd Square talking about and celebrating, not so much celebrating, but acknowledging and remembering both the trauma, but also our capacity to be resilient and to build from it. Before I ask you to address several questions that you've been working on, let me say what they are. You can think about them. One of the things I want to ask you is about the legislation presently about reclassifying marijuana legalization, not only in the state level, but the federal level. Second thing I want you to share, if you would, Senator Smith, is your sense of federal funding for your effort to support Boys and Girls Club and the Brooklyn Park Youth and Teen Center, and also the bill you've created, Youth Workforce Readiness Act. Finally, there's the Comstock Act and its risk to abortion rights nationwide. So those are things I want to cover in the next few minutes with you. But
Great.
let me first ask you, here's a question I ask a lot of people. Where were you on November 22nd, 1963, I believe? Where were you on April 4th? I think it was 1967. I might have the years wrong, but the dates are right. And where were you on May 25th, 2000 and 4 years ago,
Yeah.
2020. So
Right,
let's start
right.
from there and just talk about the moment and why it's
Interesting.
important to reflect.
That's such an interesting question. So the first two dates, I was a little girl and I was living in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I don't remember a lot about 1963. I was only 5 years old, but I remember very vividly when Dr. King was assassinated, and also Bobby King being assassinated. And what I remember is my father getting the news like kind of first thing in the morning. And I remember him just groaning. And even as a little girl, knowing that something terrible had happened, not really fully understanding it, but knowing that something was horribly wrong. And then, of course, the day that I was home in Minnesota when I learned of the the murder of George Floyd. And I remember just a sense of horror, thinking about what had happened to Mr. Floyd, thinking about the young woman who had captured this killing on live video and what impact that was having on her. And then just very quickly starting to think about the ripple effects of this through a community that I live very near to on the south side of Minneapolis, and a community that was already so traumatized by so many things. Most recently, of course, here we were in the middle of this horrible pandemic, which was disproportionately affecting people who didn't have access to good health insurance and were struggling in other ways. And so it was, I honestly think the word horror is the thing that first came to my mind. And of course, I had a lot of experience working with the Minneapolis Police Department and a pretty nuanced understanding of the strengths as well as the weaknesses of that department. And all of that was going through my mind.
Well, if you reflect on then where we were then and where we are now, a lot of commitments were made both in government and in corporate and in community level. Where do you see us at the moment, and where do we go from here?
Well, I think that I want to acknowledge you referred to sort of the resilience of the community and also, how things have changed. And I think it is easy to be cynical. And I sort of believe that hope is an act of will, not a choice that you make, or you have to make the choice to be hopeful. And so I want to just first acknowledge that I think that there have been significant things that have changed because of the murder of George Floyd and the incredible job that our Attorney General did in getting accountability, not justice, but accountability for what happened. I think that changed how people see things. I honestly believe that a lot of white people that I know have a different understanding about what it means to be policed as a person of color, as a Black or brown person or a Native person. I think that the results of the pattern and practice investigation that I called for, along with Senator Klobuchar, by the Justice Department, laid bare the realities of what policing can mean for people in our community, the unfairness of it. And so those things are the things that give me hope. But of course, you've heard me say this probably, patience is a virtue, but it is not my virtue. And I am impatient that we have not made more progress, that the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act sits there with our inability to get any Republican support. How can we move that forward? Wanting the negotiations between the city and the Justice Department to go more quickly. I want to see more results quicker.
Let's go to the other issues I brought to you earlier, Senator Smith, reclassifying marijuana legalization. Where do we stand with that? What do you want to see happen?
Well, I want to see federal legislation that would legalize cannabis. I think it is the right step to repair the great damage that has been done from the war on drugs that we all know disproportionately affected Black people, brown people in our society. And what President Biden is doing right now in two ways I think are very important steps in the right direction. The first is he is saying he is using his executive power to take marijuana, which has been classified by the federal government for decades as one of the most dangerous of drugs, right up there with heroin. And he's saying, no, we need to shift that classification in a way that will, basically put it in Schedule 3 rather than Schedule 1, which is basically a technical term by saying, acknowledging that it is not as dangerous as heroin. And then, of course, the second thing that he's done is to announce a full pardon of people who've been convicted of simple possession of marijuana on the federal level. Can't do that on the state level, but doing that on the federal level is, I think, a very important action that I strongly support. And we need to get that legalization bill, we need to get it passed.
Let's talk about youth, supporting youth. You've supported securing funding to help Boys and Girls Club and also the Brooklyn Park Youth and Teen Center. You've also got the Youth Workforce Readiness Act. Talk about those, please.
Well, I think one of the things that we all know is that human beings do better when they are connected and when they are engaged. The epidemic of social isolation and loneliness and disconnection has a really significant impact on youth, including on their physical health. And so what do we do about that? There are strong efforts at the community level to find ways of engaging youth in community. And what I've been working to do is to bring some federal funding to support those local community efforts. And two examples of that are the Zanewood Center in Brooklyn Park, which we've gotten $500,000 to support their work. Did this with my colleagues in Congress. And also the Boys and Girls Club on the east side of St. Paul, $100,000 to support their work. And, it's quite common sense. You are creating a place and a space for young people to go where they can get mentoring, they can get training, their eyes can be open to what opportunities there are in the world for them, and then they can be connected to those opportunities. And I think that that's just exactly what we need to be doing more of. And the legislation that you talked about, Al, is a piece of legislation that I have that would fuel that effort for connection in another way by supporting businesses that want to work with young people in community to give them some hands-on work experience and help those young people figure out like what they might want to do. They might be exposed to something they've never done before, didn't know about, and that might, I hope, and I believe it will, open their eyes to what the opportunities are out in the world.
That's awesome. Listen, finally, let's have you talk about the Comstock Act, its risk to abortion rights nationwide.
Yeah, well, so here's the thing. Most people in Minnesota believe that women should be able to make their own decisions about their bodies and their lives without government interference. And what's happened in Minnesota is that right, that freedom has been protected in our state constitution and in our state law, and we feel secure in that. However, a different president, a president like a future Donald Trump, could use this old archaic law, the Comstock Act, to take away those rights without a single vote in Congress. It's this old law that has been there for well over 100 years, hasn't been enforced that much, but we can see these extremist right-wingers that are getting ready for a second Trump administration, God forbid, using the authorities in that old archaic law to take away people's rights. I want folks to know about this. It's important. I'm working to repeal this old law so that it can't be used, even in Minnesota, even though we have protections. If a future President Trump chose to use this law, we don't repeal it, then it could take away our rights in Minnesota as well.
Well, hopefully there won't be a future President Trump. That's number one. And given that, Senator, what is your instruction to voters, to residents of our state and people listening around the country? What do we need to do to mobilize to ensure that we protect the democracy? I think democracy is at stake, at risk. And take a minute to encourage people to really grasp the severity of the moment.
Just in the last 24 hours, former President Trump has used Nazi rhetoric and images in his campaigning. He has threatened to take away birthright citizenship in this country, and he is doing what he knows how to do to control, which is to use chaos and fear to grab hold of power. we should believe him when he uses these messages and these images, that is, he is who he tells us that he is.
Well, he says he wants to be dictator for a day or two, right?
Exactly.
Right.
He means it. And so I would tell everyone who's listening, your voices are powerful. Democracy works because we all engage, and we have a huge opportunity to show our power, to use our power, to turn this country, to keep this country in a direction that we believe will be better for our children and grandchildren, and not towards this authoritarian threat, which is very real.
Senator Tina Smith, thank you so much. Always a pleasure to have you on the show. And obviously, we invite you back whenever you're available to connect with us. Thank you so much.
I'll see you again soon, I hope. Thank you, Al. And
Awesome.
enjoy your conversation with Rena.
Thank you, I will. Thank you. I'm Al McFarlane. This is The Conversation with Al McFarlane, special edition. We're not usually on air at KFAI on Wednesday or other days other than our Tuesday show. Thanks to KFAI for preempting programming most of this week and adding actually Saturday as a day for The Conversation. This is special because we're broadcasting live from George Floyd Square. We have declared this is George Floyd Week, and we thank you for checking us out, for listening on KFAI and listening across the social media platforms. Before Rena comes on, check out my brother Wayne. And Wayne's got a special guest with him here, I think. Randy Evenson is here. Wayne, go ahead and do it, man.
Is it the day? Is it the night when you're alone and not feeling right? You turn around 3 times and you pray. Sometimes it seems so long. I wanna go home, Africa. I wanna go home, Africa, 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 Africa. Wanna go home.
Wayne and I used to do this every week when we started this program years and years ago up at Lucille's Kitchen in North Minneapolis. It's a great feeling to be operating and working with my brother Wayne and the wonderful and talented musicians he brings. Go ahead, Wayne. We hear you.
Lucille's Kitchen days.
Yeah.
It was all those powerful debates. We're like, where are all those folks at now? Where are they?
Well, they're around. People are still working. Yeah, they're still working, and they're still fighting for their rights. And I think we've got a great challenge ahead of us as human beings, as residents, but I think we're equal to the task as well. Well, let me invite one of those warrior leaders to the microphone, and that's Rena Moran, formerly Representative Rena Moran, but now Commissioner Rena Moran, who represents St. Paul on the Ramsey County Board of Commissioners. Commissioner Moran, good afternoon. Welcome to The Conversation with Al McFarlane, here live from George Floyd Square.
Good afternoon, George. Good afternoon, Al. Thank you for the invitation to be here, and just a moment to remember George Floyd, what we was doing, and hopefully the work ahead.
Well, let me ask you the same question I started with Senator Tina Smith. Where were you in November 22nd of 1963, I believe? That's when JFK was murdered. Most people remember what they were doing and where they were. You might or you might not, but I throw that out just to have you think about it. And where were you on April 4th when Dr. King was killed? And I asked that question because I think people have the same internal, visceral impact, witnessing, remembering where they were on May 25th, which is this Saturday from 2020, when our when George Floyd was killed. Where were you? And how does all that line up in your spirit?
Just trying to learn my age, right? I think that that is. But in 1963, I was 3, right? So I don't quite remember what I was doing. But, as I reflect back on my household and my mother and, the sadness of that day, because for our Black household, it was the Kennedy family, right? Where there was a sense of hope. And, it just trickled down to where we are today with that sense of hopelessness. When we try to find hope and won't hope, with something like this that happens. Yeah. And as we talk about George Floyd, I remember being at home and catching it on Facebook, right? And was horrified of the image, horrified that there was a police officer kneeling on George's neck in the daytime, in the daylight, for all to see, and remembering that
Right outside where we are.
right outside where we are today, in
This is
front
where
of others to witness it, and had no care in the world about what was happening. And I also remember thinking that for so many years, how I and so many others has felt like the world and the police and others had their knee on our necks, right? And it was it was sad, it was just a really, really sad moment to hear George Floyd call out to his mother.
Yes.
It was a really sad moment.
So, Commissioner, how does all of that flow into your work as a commissioner? Talk about the things that are priorities on your desk right now. What are you trying to do for Ramsey County that moves the county towards its best self? What are your priorities right now?
It is just a continuation of the work I did at the legislature. In 2020, the House was in the majority, the Senate was in the minority. And so we called on police, not police reform. We wanted police accountable. Police had to be accountable for the actions that we saw happening to George Floyd. So it was about bringing community, bringing legislators together, and demanding that we do police accountability and change the laws and policies that impact the practices that we were continuing to see back out in our community. So we did work around the chokehold, right? That made it illegal for that to happen. We did a duty to intercede, which was really important because we saw other police officers holding other people back and not intervening. So a duty to intercede, that you have a duty to intercede. Looking at police resident reform, I'm a strong believer still today that police officers need to live in the municipality in which they are working. Having outside police officers come in to patrol our community, it's the results of what we've seen. There's no connections, no relationship, and they see us as the others. That was really important. The use of force bill, working on those things. One of the biggest and one of the hardest bill that was hard for me and my colleagues in the House to pass was around the use of force. Because in that language around use of force, there's a word called, it needs to be in an apparent threat. Apparent threat means a police officer can see a child holding a toy gun and think they are being threatened. They can see a phone and believe this is a apparent threat. So we wanted to change that language from apparent threat to an imminent threat. A lot of pushback from police officers, the chiefs, and the sheriffs, and it took a lot of work, but we did get that bill and that language moved. And just to look at the sanctity of life, that Black lives do matter. That Black lives do matter, and there has to be a sense of a sanctity of life because we need to go home. If we are stopped, we need to go home, right? You can lock us up, you can ask the questions, but we need to put sanctity of life at the forefront of how police officers see us in our community.
You know, that's so important because we often hear, and we agree with it, an officer who risked her or his life to serve community deserves to go home.
Absolutely.
And I think we've heard that, especially in late times in recent years, but we haven't heard what you just said, is that the people that are stopped by an officer also need to go home, that stop should not end up being capital punishment. No jury, no judge, no formal charges, no process, dead. And that is unacceptable.
Oh, and that's what that was the narrative. Yes, police officer, because of the work they do, they should be able to go back home, but so should those that they encounter, right? They cannot be the judge and the jury, and so a lot of work went into that language to change the language in a very hostile environment, right? Over in the Senate, who refused to do anything, that did not even want to talk about it. But community shows up, and that is the power of community, showing up, being present, having a voice, forcing a narrative, being a part of the solution, and then to have legislators, to have individuals who are legislators that look like us. It's always important, right? Who's moving an agenda, because this is not just something. It is about our lives. It is about our children's lives, and so I carry that same type of insight, initiative, and fight into Ramsey County, right? As we look at the sheriff department, what do that needs to look like? And let me see, everything doesn't have to be, I use the word fight because sometimes it is a fight, right? But I also believe in building relationships. Relationships last for a lifetime. They really do. And they come in handy, because that's how I got some of the things moved in the Senate with folks who did not value what I cared about in the same way. But it is having those relationships, moving an agenda that brings value and see our community in a different way within the sheriff department, which is a Ramsey County entity versus the police, which is more city. So I continue to do that. I continue to remind people about the policies that had to be moved, not just policies. It's like we have to make policies become a life theme, right? Where people know it, they feel it, they're repeating it, and they can see a value in the humanity that we're trying to bring into Ramsey County, right? Looking around racial equity, right? And leading with community, engaging those who've been impacted by the system that has disproportionately impacted their lives. Looking at the work I'm doing with bail reform, looking at the work I'm doing with the youth justice transformation, and there is so there's a few things going on, right? But it's all about how do we look at the policies and the practice and engage those who've been impacted by the system to also lead those systems, but also put some dollars behind it.
Let's talk about youth in particular. Senator Smith talked about her support for work on the east side. I know you're familiar with that. That's your old neighborhood. And what about youth? That's question one. Question two, what priorities does Ramsey County place on resolving the issue of homelessness, people who are unhoused? How are those problems being addressed at the county level?
So as you know, we heard Senator Smith talk about our long relationships that we've had when she was the chief of staff on to the lieutenant governor. We worked together when I introduced the African American, the Women of Color Opportunity Act, right? So we have some really good long relationships. You talked about the Boys and Girls Club. I grew up in back in the day, it wasn't called Boys and Girls, it was just a boys club, right? But I grew up in the boys club. So that has a really, it still is a really big part of how I see public safety, which is investing in young people's lives. Giving them a park and rec to go to, creating access where it's free. I forget, what was the other part of the question?
Young people in particular, and housing priorities, particularly around homelessness.
So in Ramsey County, we have a program called Heading Home Ramsey County, where there is a partnership between Ramsey County, the city of St. Paul, community-based organizations, the philanthropic community, again, those who've been impacted, to really work on our homeless population. I'm a huge supporter, advocate of face-to-face who is doing a lot of work in St. Paul for homeless youth. They're located in downtown St. Paul on 7th Street, which really is a whole holistic approach of not just giving young people a place to sleep, but dealing with the mental health pieces of it, to look at how we can train them. I'm leading on workforce development, and I'm the lead county commissioner on workforce, because I do believe the best social service program that we can give somebody is a job and give them the tools to be in the workforce. So all of that goes together. Homelessness, we can't just serve, we just can't house people. We also need to make sure that we're taking care of their mental health needs. That if youth have family members, that we're looking at other family members, the whole household, that we are creating jobs and training and connecting them with St. Paul College. And believe me, we are doing an excellent job in the workforce arena to connect all of that together to make sure that, and we have, what is that? The Adjusted Youth Transformation Group that is really leading in Ramsey County, right? They are leading, they're entrepreneurs, they dream big, they want big, but they need government, right? And that's my job, to align the support of government, because government has a role to make people's lives better, to make sure that we're connecting those dots.
Here's my last question. I'll ask you to tie together the connection between George Floyd Square here and the development that's needed because of what has happened here, but how that shows up in other parts of the state. You're in Ramsey County, we're in Hennepin County, but Ramsey County and all over the state and communities around the country are equally impacted by the issues revealed by the trauma and tragedy. What do you see as the binding force to move communities and society forward beyond George Floyd?
Yeah. So when you look around, as it is here in South Minneapolis, but North Minneapolis,
Pull the microphone up.
as we look at St. Paul and the development that is needed, it's called intentionality, right? And so I know I have some strong partners in the State House. When you look at President Champion, right? You look at the Black Caucus in the House, in the Senate, in the legislature. Then you look at over at St. Paul, it is being intentional about looking at how we invest our dollars. I'm a strong believer that when we look and talk about inequities, it's not enough to just talk about disparities and inequities. We need to invest in those most impacted areas of our cities and in our communities, and with people who've been disproportionately impacted by lack of funding, lack of support, and let's call it out, like racism, right? And so it's very intentional to bring those capital dollars into our community, engage our young people, engage the community in that process, because often they know best what they want. They know best what they want it to look like. And so they need to be a part of that solution base and just creating this whole network of support, and Hennepin is Hennepin, but Ramsey is Ramsey, right? But at the end of the day, what's impacting Hennepin Black community, if we want to be more specific, it's the same thing that's impacting the Rondo community, right? And we have to be very intentional about bringing those dollars over into our community and invest.
Rena Moran, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for the work you do.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your work.
Sure. Thank you. I'm Al McFarlane. This is the Conversation with Al McFarlane, broadcasting live from George Floyd Square. We're at the Listen to Us studios owned by King Demetrius Pendleton. We thank him for making this space available and facilitating a place for voices to emerge concerned about how we move forward beyond the trauma, the tragedy of the death of George Floyd right here. This is ground zero for the crisis, but also it's a place out of which we grow and out of which we transform our society and ourselves. Wayne, what you got? Al McFarlane and his special guest friend, Rand Evenson. Thank you both for being here. I want to continue. Again, we're broadcasting live from George Floyd Square in South Minneapolis, and we're here all week through Saturday. This will be the first Saturday show we've ever done, but live on KFAI. I'll remind you that KRSM's The Narrative, which normally is on at this time of day, will return next week. We thank them for allowing us to use their space for the special commemoration from George Floyd Square in South Minneapolis. I want to pivot now to another person who represents, the experience of tragedy and of loss at the hands of law enforcement. My next guest is Brother Aubrey Wright. Aubrey Wright, because his son, Dante Wright, was killed in Minneapolis, or actually Brooklyn Center. And in fact, first of all, let me just ask you to tell the story. Aubrey Wright, first of all, welcome to the Conversation with Al McFarlane. And those who are listening, if you get a question or a comment, please put it in the comment section. We want to have you weigh in on the conversation. But Aubrey, number one, our condolences remain, and our hearts remain with you and your family for the loss of your son, Dante Wright. Tell us what happened, when it happened, what happened, and how it impacted you.
Well, my son Dante was killed April 11th, 2021. He was pulled over in a traffic stop for having freshness hanging from his window. Then it went as far as saying he was pulled over for having expired registration. However, the case, the officer claimed that she mistakenly used her firearm. She mistaken her taser for a firearm. And the result was Dante was killed that day. So my family has been impacted deeply since then.
How are you feeling right now? How do you feel right now?
Right now, I feel confused, to be honest. We stand for accountability. These officers doing whatever they feel, and just like they say, they want to make it home, but everyone needs to make it home safely.
If I recall, the officer who shot and killed your son was convicted, but I'm not sure how the family feels about the conviction that resulted from it, and also from the sentencing that resulted from it. Can you kind of walk us through that, what the charges were, and how that entire process was handled, from your point of view as a parent?
Well, honestly speaking, we fought hard, and we were very excited that she was being convicted for what she did. But then the 2-year sentence that turned into 16 months was like a slap to the face for us. My family felt, we upset. We still upset. We heartbroken, and the results of what happened. And me personally, I feel like that we were laughed at. I felt ashamed, to be honest, because this is where I'm from, and we walk around here, and to know that what we thought was that this officer was being held accountable, she really wasn't to us, because 16 months was nothing for murder.
It seemed like the sentencing judge showed more compassion for the officer than for the life that was lost. That was my impression watching this unfold on television. I don't know if other people felt the same way as I felt, but that's what I hear you saying right now. You think that justice was not delivered on behalf of your son, Dante Wright. Am I saying that properly?
Absolutely. Justice was not delivered for this judge, a professional person, to shed tears for the officer. Me as a father, I sat there and I just cried because, there's nothing I could do. But this lady showed compassion for the killer of my son. It was a slap to the face. It hurts every day.
What have you heard in community about that? Because again, I gave you my reaction, and I'm sensing that other people felt the same way. Unbelievable that the judge would be tearfully compassionate towards the officer, but in a sense well, I don't want to say the wrong thing, but not enough acknowledgement of the pain of the family, but certainly not valuing the life that was taken. Am I overstating my case?
I've heard people in the community just say, wow. It was just like, wow. But I've heard people say that was expected, because it was expected because people in the community, we've been dealing with this type of thing for years, and it was kind of like it was like the secret in the room that nobody talked about. So it was like a lot of people was very upset, but a lot of people felt like, well, it was expected because she's one of them.
I asked you to take a minute just to talk about your own family, your background, where you all are from, and how long you've been here in Minnesota. But what's the family genealogy, the lineage that you represent?
Well, my family, I raised them north side of Minneapolis. I'm from Chicago, but I was raised here in St. Paul on the west side, a little of the east side as well. But I raised my children over North Minneapolis, so they were from here, Minneapolis.
Where's your family from? Where are your parents from?
My parents is from Chicago, Illinois, south side.
How many generations in Chicago?
Oh man,
Y'all deep, huh?
we really deep. It's a lot of right. So many generations. Oh man,
Grandma.
it's a lot of us.
Yeah.
All right. Listen, what else needs to happen? Is everything done now with Dante Wright's legal and judicial system? Is it over, or is there still litigation underway?
Well, everything is over with the legal stuff. What needs to be happen is we're what needs to happen is we need to start holding these officers accountable. That's what needs to happen. People need to start standing up and saying stuff instead of being quiet.
I'll be right, brother. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for your testimony today. Our hearts and minds go out for you. Our spirit is with you. We value you for the loss you suffered, the sacrifice your family has experienced, but also for your courage in speaking up and inviting all of us to stand with you and stand with other families that have experienced this trauma. Brother, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
All right, I'm Al McFarlane. This is The Conversation with Al McFarlane. We're broadcasting live from the George Floyd Square in South Minneapolis. Thanks to King Demetrius Pendleton again. He's the proprietor of Listen to Us Studio in South Minneapolis. And he's been documenting what's been going on around here since the uprising. So we thank him for that, and we thank you for listening too. We're going to continue this conversation in just a minute with more guests. I'm Al McFarlane. This is The Conversation with Al McFarlane. Here's Wayne McFarlane and Rand Evenson for the break. I'm Al McFarlane. This is the Conversation with Al McFarlane. We're broadcasting live from George Floyd Square in South Minneapolis. Thanks to King Demetrius Pendleton. He's the owner of Listen to a Studio. It's a wonderful place. King Demetrius is an independent photojournalist. He's doing great work and presenting that work in studio here at 3730 Chicago Avenue. It's really George Floyd Square. So you're welcome to drop by here anytime and look at the exhibit of his work. There are other galleries in the neighborhood. All of them welcome your presence and your compassion, your thought, your feeling, because this is a community celebration or community observance and a community reaffirmation of our resilience and our ability to be with each other and to be in peace. Well, I've got a person that I want to bring in now, Toshira Garraway Allen. If I said the name improperly, you'll let me know. And she was the fiance of Justin Teigen. Justin Teigen was killed by police. Toshira, thank you for being here. Condolences, our heartfelt, sadness for what you've had to experience. But welcome to the program. Tell us the story. What happened?
So on August 19th, 2009, Justin Teigen, the father of my son and also my fiance, he was pulled over by the St. Paul police. When he was pulled over, ultimately he ended up dead, brutally beat to death in a trash dumpster. When police first arrived at Justin's grandmother's house, we were told that Justin was in a car accident and missing from the scene of the scene of an accident. We were not told that it was a traffic stop. We ended up finding out later that it was in fact also a traffic stop. We also were told that this incident happened in one area off of St. Anthony, but it actually happened at a total different location. So when we went to look for Justin, nothing was there. We were just sent off somewhere else. Justin's mother and grandma ended up, as they were driving, finding Justin's car. When they found his car, they were then pulled over. They tried to drive over to the car. They were then pulled over at gunpoint. His mother and his 65-year-old grandmother. They were told to get off the street. They were followed home by police. And so after that, hours later, we began to just continue to try to find him. There was a Black officer that came to Justin's mother's home that night and said that he was concerned for Justin's safety because there were some officers that had it out for him. I know a week prior to Justin ended up dead in a dumpster after being pulled over. A week prior to that, he was beat up by police a week before that. So after the officer came and told us that, and also when Justin's mother and grandmother was pulled over at gunpoint, they also told his mom to tell them where Justin was or they were going to let the dogs eat him alive. That's what they stated to his mother. And then a few hours later, Justin was found dead in a recycling facility. Brutally, his skull was cracked in half. He had dog bites on his body. His wrist was detached from his arms where he had the handcuffs. His eyeballs were punched in. It was just blood all over his face. It was a very traumatizing, horrific scene. I always say that Justin was a modern day lynching, that it was a modern day Emmett Till, the way that his body looked. Disfigured. We could barely tell who he was in the casket. His head was this big and cracked. Literally, his skull was literally cracked in half. His murder was the epitome of a cover-up here in Minnesota. Literally, they altered the videos. We have videos that one of the videos goes blank an hour before the other two videos. I'm literally in a lawsuit right now out of 15 years because I was fighting for the data of what happened, just to provide me and my son and Justin's mother with the closure that we deserve. We were falsely told by St. Paul that there were no videos. The medical examiner's office worked together in this cover up to cover up Justin's murder. They would not release the copies of the videos that they had, even when they were shown in the law where they were breaking the law. They still refused. It was only after a lawsuit was filed that they came up with this botched version or whatever, that blanks videos are blanking out. So I've been followed by police. They used to wave at me with my son in the car as soon as I would request those footages. The harassment I have received really put a lot of fear in my heart. And now I am just fighting despite sometimes the fear. I've received death threats at different points. They've sent death threats to the attorney that I worked with, all kinds of stuff. But that's pretty much my story.
It's a horrible story, and thank you for sharing it. Thank you for the courage to tell the story, to show up, and to not hold back. So when did this occur again? The date?
The date was August 19, 2009.
2009. So now, May 25th, 2020, George Floyd is murdered. What does it do for you? How does this? Go ahead.
When I seen George Floyd on Facebook Live get murdered, my only thought was to share as much as I could, because I know what they're capable of. I live every day of my life, entire cover up. They frame Justin's story to look like it was an accident. They tampered with the footages and all that kind of stuff. So I know, and just pay attention to how they did George Floyd in the beginning, how they were saying he died a different way than we all witnessed with our own eyes, where there's families out there that they actually did get away with the initial untruthfulness that they came with for the story. So my knowing from my experience and what I've dealt with, how they can cover up these murders of Black, Indigenous, and minority people, knowing how fast they work, my thought in my head was to share it as much as I could. And I'm in a bunch of groups on social media. So I was sending them like I probably stayed up all night long, sending these, that video to those different groups, because I wanted people to see it. And it did. I do believe in my heart that George Floyd's death cracked a door for the rest of us, because there's even more families beyond me. I started an organization called Family Supporting Families Against Police Violence, where I support families that have lost loved ones at the hands of the police, financial support, emotional, mental support, all that kind of. We've been holding support group meetings for the last almost 5 years, but and just doing a bunch of the rallies and protests and organizing them as well. But what it did for me is it actually helped to trigger that fight inside of me, because I wanted to fight for Justin back then, but I was afraid because I was a 23-year-old Black girl, and my father said Justin ended up dead in a dumpster. You know what I mean? So that fear and them harassing me, following me, all of that was real. But his death, George Floyd death, actually ignited a fight inside of me.
Gabe is here. Gabe, welcome to the Conversation with Al McFarlane. What's the story on your mind?
My name is Gabriel Black Elk. I'm the brother of Paul Castaway. My brother Paul was killed in Denver, Colorado on July 12, 2015. My brother was having a schizophrenic episode. He stopped taking his medication because he said he didn't like the way it made him feel. So he started having an episode, and then my mom called the police to get him help, and she stressed that to the police that he needed help. But when the police showed up, my brother was leaving my mom's apartment, and he took off. He took off running because he knew that they were out to hurt him. So he ran across the street and ran into a trailer park. From there, you can see him. There's a video out of it, but you can see him. He ran into a trailer park where they cornered him, and they shot him and killed him in front of 18 kids and 3 adults. And yeah, and since then I haven't stopped. I haven't stopped advocating for him. I haven't stopped protesting for him. You know, I keep bringing his name out. You know, I've been from Los Angeles to Seattle to New York City and everywhere in between. And, you know, that's what we're still doing. That's what we're still doing. I'm also one of the lead organizers of Native Lives Matter. We're not based really anywhere because we have people that are on our team that are across this country that also lost people to police violence. And you know, I'm just here to spread my brother's name, spread his word, and you know, let people know that having a mental health condition is not a crime.
What's the connection, as you see it, Brother Gabe, coming out of the George Floyd Square, the George Floyd murder? How does that tie all of our families and all of our stories together?
Yeah. Well, I'll say this. I'm not from here. I'm not from Minneapolis. My brother wasn't killed in Minnesota. You know, I'm from Denver, Colorado, and also where my brother was killed by police. And you know, I came here to protest the first time for Philando Castile, and we came here, and you know, that's where we met. You know, King Demetrius and Tashira. And we've just been coming out for each other ever since. You know, it didn't start with George Floyd. You know, for us, it started with Philando Castile and bunch of other families in between then. And then when what happened with George Floyd, you could just tell that the community they were fed up. They were fed up with it, and you can just. You know, if he wasn't watching, if he wasn't paying attention, you know, people can tell you, you know, what they saw here, what they experienced. But but I feel like, you know, we were part of a change. We were part of a bigger change that happened not only, you know, here in Minnesota and not only across the country, but around the world too, because people heard us.
So some would say that this is at one level the work of the Spirit, massive and hurtful sacrifices of families, but there's something at the end of this. What would it be? What could it be? What can be the outcome of this, brother?
The best outcome that we can see is just keep unitizing. Just keep unifying, just keep coming together, because it's the only way that we're going to be able to change and be heard is by all of us, you know, sticking together, coming together to help one another out.
Brother, thank you so much. Brother Gabe and Sister Tashira, condolences, but applause to you both for the courage and the conviction that you have that justice is available. I'm Al McFarlane. This is The Conversation with Al McFarlane. We'll see you tomorrow right here at George Floyd Square. Now, I have to say that Thursday's program will be live to social media, not live to the radio, but back here live to the radio on Friday and Saturday. Join us. I'm Al McFarlane. We'll see you next time.